springs. Oh, look at that magic. Many of you will be familiar with the format of our spring schools, which is unique within BCS. Eminent speakers will explore the chosen topic over 4 consecutive Thursday evenings this March. This year, you have all signed up for the important and topical subject of responsible project management. Slides and a recording of each session will be made available as soon as we can, and if possible, before the next session. So these are the 5 speakers, and I'll quickly run through. Dr. Karen Thompson will actually kick off the session. And next week, Dr. Katrina Prince will follow on with some case studies. And then Dr. Brendan de Cruz will talk about enabling responsible transformation. Brendan's spoken to us several times before and used to be on our committee. And then on the final week, we've got Chief Executive of BCS, Rashik Palmer, talking about lessons for the future of RPM. And then Dr. Nigel Williams will take over a panel discussion on institutionalizing RPM management. So that's what you can look forward to over the coming 4 weeks. So a little bit about Karen before she kicks off. You may have seen something on the website about Karen. She spent 17 years in IS and IT, from trainee computer programmer through systems analysis to project leader and then IS/IT strategy consultant. Some of you might recognize that route. She has been in academia for 25 years, business school, teaching database, and then project management and consultancy. Karen's PhD in project management is from Bournemouth University. Her focus is now the intersection of project management and sustainability. Karen was the winner of Project Management Institute UK's first Teaching Excellence Award, and her RPM team won PMI's Award for Innovation in Project Management and Project Management for Social Good in 2019. So Karen is ideal to get the school underway. And I'll hand over to Karen now, if I may.
Thank you very much indeed, David. And first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm just trying to do my screen share. And, here we go. Right. Yeah, so this is for me a bit like coming home, because my first degree was one of the very first BScs in computing, which was sort of the applied technology way back. I won't say how many, many years ago, as you'll no doubt have gathered from those 17 plus 25 years. And I think I probably was a member of BCS and PROMS-G at one point in the dim and distant past. So as I say, it's delightful to be back with you, to have been invited to kick off the spring series in what is very, very dear to my heart these days, and indeed my whole raison d'etre at the moment, which is responsible project management. Can you all see the screen share okay now? No, I'm not doing a proper screen share, am I? There we are. Can you now see it? Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, lovely. So I'm going to attempt to address what is responsible project management, why responsibility matters, the big challenges, and then in particular to unpack some of the things we're suggesting that we can do as project managers to improve what we do. So, I see I put the Padlet link on the very first screen. So that should be in the chat now. I don't know whether people have arrived after the chat, after the that was shared in the chat, so you might want to share that again if you can. Okay, so a team of us first formed the Responsible Project Management movement, and that's what it is at the moment. It's not a commercial entity, it's not a professional body, although as you'll see in a moment, we do engage with all of those. So at the time, Nigel and I were both at Bournemouth University. And Dr. Shirley Thompson, no relation, her focus is very much the responsible conversations, and she's essentially a coach. So yeah, so there's the nicer picture of Nigel, who will be chairing the final session in the spring series. Okay, so why did we, just very briefly then, why did we start responsible project management? I suppose it was really very much born out of frustration that was shared by many project managers and many people in the industry around how slow the profession was to respond to the societal and environmental challenges faced around the globe. I know one of the specific cornerstones we touched was Peter Morris writing on, with APM, writing on that same topic about how slow the profession was being at that point. This was back in 2017, in responding to some of the challenges. And I suppose the headline there that I keep coming back to time and time again is projects create the future. We as project managers create the future. So we really need to start stepping up and adopting a responsible role in connection with delivering projects. And I'll explain why that matters in a minute. Okay, so just very briefly, who am I? That was a lovely introduction. Thank you and welcome. Thank you very much indeed, David. So I've just come, well, you may well have seen this on some people in LinkedIn now who actually have on their profile, they were born at 318 ppm. I've got a horrible feeling I can't now see the chat, so I guess I won't ask if anybody knows what that is. The clue is on the right hand side, of course. It is the parts per million related to CO2 in the atmosphere at the time we were born. So that's a little job. We could pause for a moment, actually, if you'd like to look up what your ppm is. There's the website there that I use, co2.350.org. You could try, if you've got a phone or a computer to hand, just Googling that, put in your year and month of birth, and it'll tell you how many parts per million of carbon dioxide there was in the atmosphere when you were born. And of course, the really scary thing is looking at comparing that with where we are today, which is 411.44 parts per million now. So again, so I can't see the chat, which is a little bit frustrating, but maybe when you go into your groups in a few minutes, you might like to exchange those notes. And I don't want to only focus on carbon. That has stolen the headlines for many, well, quite a few years now, but that's not the only challenge facing society, but we'll come on to that later. So David's already very kindly covered briefly my 17 years in information systems, 25 years in academia, really culminating with where I am now, which is working at that intersection of project management and sustainability. And I was part of a business school for all of that time in academia. And I was sort of very much working at sustainable business and trying to really focus that thinking. So those three initials after my name are three fellowships, one of which is the Association for Project Management, and the other, or another, is the fellowship for the Advanced HE, or Higher Education Academy, as it was when I was awarded the fellowship. And then our latest, or my latest fellowship, but also it's a very close relationship we're developing for RPM, is with the Schumacher Institute, who are all about sustainability and systems thinking. And again, I'll talk more about that later. And then just down the bottom, there are some of the things I'm specifically doing at the moment. I stepped away from a full-time academic role in order to try and progress RPM to a much greater extent. So moving straight on then to our agenda, why does responsibility matter? Well, even if we set aside the challenges that I've started to allude to, what we've become aware of is that projects are becoming increasingly difficult to deliver. So even if you have a very conventional view of project management being about delivering your project on cost, time and quality requirements, the challenges and difficulties are growing as we speak. And here are just some of the dimensions we've identified that where those challenges come from. So as a result of being increasingly globally connected through things like social media, projects and the role of the project manager are increasingly visible. What that's revealing to the wider world is, of course, that many projects fail and many are challenged. And if any of us were thinking that sort of consequences sometimes are well after our project finishes, I think Grenfell Tower, and am I talking to an entirely UK audience? I'm not sure. I'll assume not. But for those that don't know, Grenfell Tower was a very sad disaster in London a few years ago now, where the cladding on a building wasn't as safe as it should have been, and there was a very great fire that killed a number of people. And I think we're now into our third inquest. And the project managers that were responsible at the time are being called to account. So I think some of the challenges, although we might think that sustainability, for example, is somebody else's responsibility, especially if we're working in an organization with a sustainability manager, the decisions we take all the time as project managers can have consequences well into the future. Data and analytics is in the headlines, but one of the things we've are increasingly commenting on is the fact that analytics and getting more project data together has huge advantages and is very beneficial, but it's only going to increase accountability, not responsibility. I can talk more about that, but I think I'll keep going at the moment. We can come back to that if we need to. I've already alluded to the climate and ecological crises. Where that is leading us in terms of project management is that last point. Organizations are increasingly needing to demonstrate their values. And there are a couple of reasons for that. I don't know whether your projects will be affected by actions, either by people within the organization. There was a Project Managers Declare movement. We've had the school strikes where the children have been out protesting about some of these crises. London, as you know, is in a flood basin, and there's been a lot of work. Then we've drawn on them as one of the case studies about the Thames Barrier and the flood defences in London. So all of these social and ecological crises are increasingly and can increasingly impact our work as project managers. Again, you may have been aware in London last year, due to the climate crisis, we saw record temperatures in London. I think it was 40 properties were lost. Now, clearly, at the very local level, if you had staff who were affected, that may well have affected your project. Or alternatively, if something like the strikes or access to a site was adversely affected, that could directly impact projects. So we are seeing all of these things impacting projects and project management, even if we just take a very conventional view. And the other thing we are hearing from organizations is that they recognize that increasingly they won't be able to recruit and retain the best people if they are shown to be acting irresponsibly or in ways that exacerbate conflict in society. Now, I can't remember if I've got another slide on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. If I haven't, or sorry, if you're not already familiar with them, and I know quite often I'm speaking to audiences and by no means is everybody aware of those goals. They were actually defined by the United Nations in 2015. Progress has been very slow, but what these are essentially about, I mean, one of them is action on the climate. There are others there at the bottom you can see under, I don't know if I can make that bigger, the environment. We've grouped, because there are 17 goals, for helping to understand projects, we've grouped them together under those three broad headings of planet, people, and prosperity. So some of them are about society and some of them are about the planet, and others are about economic considerations. And then we further broken them down, each one of those, into two more groups that we hope will help project managers to get their head around, because 17 is a lot to be thinking about at any one time. And we wouldn't expect that any one project is actually going to contribute to all 17, but you may well be able to identify a selection of these that your project does either contribute to or actually exacerbate the problem that that goal is trying to address. So it's widely recognised that progress has been slow, but that doesn't mean in any way that any of those goals have been met or the need for them has disappeared. So I just want to put projects in context, because there were problems, I believe, in the way that sustainable development was conceptualized. You probably, if you've looked at sustainability, you will have seen traditional views of sustainable development as having three dimensions: the environment, society, and the economy, with the possibility of making trade-offs between them. Now, in project terms, or indeed just in logic terms, making trade-offs between those things makes no sense. Because the economy depends on having healthy societies, and having healthy societies depends upon having a healthy environment where we can all thrive. So projects sit on top of that. But as I say, the point I really want to emphasize is every project has a context, has an economic context, a social context, and an environmental context, whether we recognize it or not. Just because we're not aware of it doesn't mean that we're not affecting those dimensions. So where responsibility thinking, and one of the cornerstones for responsible project management was the work that's been done on responsible management, we can no longer consider ourselves as acting responsibly if we don't recognize that you can't make trade-offs between these things, but they're dependencies. Now, where I am hopeful is that project managers really understand dependencies. We model dependencies in our projects all the time. So we have a lot of the skills and competencies that are needed to help move sustainable development forward. And indeed, I will put it to you and argue that we have a crucial role, because projects create the future, in stepping up to meet some of those challenges now. So one of the things we've been advocating for, and one of the areas where these new competencies come from, is this idea of systems thinking. Now, this isn't new. I was trained in systems thinking as a systems analyst back far too many years ago. Every few years it comes around as another fashion. But in terms of the way project rethinking that's gone on within project management, that has clearly emphasized the context for each project and the complexity. These are not, projects are done by humans for humans. They're not, they can't be run using a simple input-output process. And I'm sure you all know this, complexities we face in projects are much more, but unfortunately what we tend to focus on a lot of the time is that tip of the iceberg that we can see. So systems thinking requires us to think a lot more about the bits that we can't immediately see. So the budget on the line isn't the only thing that we need to be managing. So I like that metaphor of the iceberg, and I'm sure you'll have come across that before. So one of our, you'll see when we get to talking about what responsible project management is, essentially it's a set of three values, the first of which is raising conscious awareness of the impacts and consequences, very often unintended consequences, of projects in these other domains of the environment and society and communities that we, through our projects, bring about. We are still ahead of schedule, so we could invite each group to just briefly maybe make one contribution, just to give us one thing off the Padlet, off their notes. Group one, who was in group one? Do you want to unmute and just...
Yeah, I was in group one. So we discussed a lot of ways that we try and make changes in our personal lives. So, for example, extended device lifetime. Somebody in our group had said how they don't upgrade mobiles all the time now. They just get a new battery and then use online software rather than getting new laptops just so that you can download the new software. And then we did speak about going paperless, but that's probably increasing your online footprint while you're trying to be sustainable in other ways. But yeah, that was pretty much what we discussed.
Brilliant. Thank you, Katie. Okay, if we can have one thing from each group. So group 2, what did you come up with? What was perhaps your most important point that hasn't already been mentioned? Anyone from group 2 like to unmute?
Yeah, largely it's pull the plug out and leave it out when you don't need it on. Don't leave stuff on standby and sleep modes.
Yeah.
Don't make everything so it connects to Wi-Fi. It needs to be plugged in all the time as well. You don't need it to be Alexa enabled. You can actually turn lights on and off with a finger.
Yep, indeed.
Like yeah.
Thank you, David. Okay, group 3. Anyone from group 3?
I'm not entirely sure what group I was in number wise, but I was in a group with CD and Avina. So unless anyone else is in group 3, I guess that was us. So yeah, one of the main things that we spoke about was definitely data centers and how obviously going paperless, we're now storing more things in the cloud. So that's creating more storage and basically obviously all your inbox, if you've got a load of things archived in your inbox and you're not properly deleting them, same with like old documents and stuff like that that you're storing in the cloud, is obviously, you know, there's some server somewhere or some computer somewhere that's holding all that data that's being constantly powered on, so you can constantly get 24/7 access to that data. So, you know, it's just kind of having that responsibility to clear your inbox out and clear old documents out. And then CD also kind of highlighted the responsibility of data centers to use sustainable energy as well. And obviously that's kind of above our personal carbon footprints, but yeah, really good discussion points.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Anya. The one I've got on my list that probably is closest to that is the one, and I hadn't really thought this through until I started researching this, but download content instead of streaming it, which is sort of building on your thoughts there. And I mean, again, it takes me way back. I mean, I can remember decades ago, we thought it was a good idea to put data centers in cold places. And yet the other day I was reading an article that was talking about the amount of energy that they're putting, well, the heat that's going into the rivers is starting to have an environmental impact on the local fish. So we're going to have to rethink that idea about where we do use these to reduce the amount of energy they're using. So yes, so thank you very much, Anya. Group 4, anybody?
Yes, due to the, it's Amit from group 4, due to the scalability of cloud and as a cloud, I think it's the problem of online carbon footprint is going to grow exponentially. So in order to reduce it, maybe reduce the reliance on cloud or utilize what's your usage on the cloud service, because you can launch a new computer within seconds, virtual instance within seconds. So you just gotta watch how much you're using, basically just monitor what you use.
Lovely. Yes, thank you, Amit. Okay, group 5. Anybody?
This is Anil, in the absence of other people putting their hand up. One of the things that we talked about is solar panels on your home. I know it's an expensive thing, but actually it's a zero cost. Well, it'll be net neutral in 15 years after installation.
Yeah, so using that to power your own computers. Yes, lovely. Yep. Thank you, Anil. Okay, which were you, group 5? Group 6 then? Anybody from group 6?
Hello.
Hello, Tony Lee.
Hi. We spoke about how you could reduce computer and technology usage at work. However, that's really hard. So we looked at monitoring personal use.
Okay, lovely. Any specific things you can do to reduce your carbon footprint? Did you come up with?
We spoke a lot about using like many devices at once, like your phone and your laptop, or your telly and your laptop, so only using one device at a time.
Yes, lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Tony Lee. And I think that just leaves group 7. Anybody want to give us a key point off your list that hasn't already been mentioned?
Yeah, I think Amit was in our group. I think we may have reported as group 4. So we were looking at the cloud storage, so just to confuse the system.
Oh, okay. Well, anybody's group not been represented that you would like to share anything? Okay, well, the sorts of things I've got on my list that came from the Eco-Friendly Web Alliance. Don't leave devices on standby. I think one of the groups fed that back. Avoid unnecessary web searches. Reduce the brightness of your computer monitor. I did that actually when I was on the train the other day and wanted to make my battery last a bit longer. So there can be benefits all round of doing things like doing some of these things. Download content instead of streaming, I think I've already mentioned. Close multiple browser windows. I ticked it because it was sort of keeping equipment going longer was certainly mentioned, but the idea of buying refurbished or remanufactured rather than new, and make your website more eco-friendly. And one thing I will just mention, because it may be relevant to the next activity, that again, I didn't realize, was that some colors on the color palette that you use for your screens drains the batteries faster than others. So all are affected by brightness. Each pixel is affected by brightness, but some colors are more battery draining than others. But the social angle here is that colors manipulate mood and thinking. So in terms of the social impact, I thought that was particularly interesting. So, okay, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for your participation and engagement. So moving on then, the challenges. So I've already shared with you our thoughts about many of the challenges we face, and say even if we take a very conventional view of project management, we would argue that the difficulties of delivering projects are increasing, even if we were to ignore all the other environmental and social impacts that projects may have. But one of the fundamental things, and I think I'm going back to Einstein here, to say really that if we keep doing the same things, we can't keep expecting a different output. Or in other words, you can't solve the problems of today with the same thinking that created them. And we're all becoming more and more aware of the climate crisis, of the social issues that are affecting us all. At the moment, we've obviously got the war in Ukraine that's having a ripple down effect on everything from food prices to energy costs and so forth. We're seeing more migration. Some of that may well be political, some of it is economic and so forth. But it's clear that our existing way of doing things, and mostly I'm talking about here about big business, about the way of doing business, has brought about many of these problems. So I would argue, and many people now are arguing, that our existing systems are broken. And we're talking about social and environmental and economic systems that are driving many of the crises that we are increasingly becoming aware of. But the problems are systemic. There aren't quick fixes. And even more importantly, no one person or group of people or organization has all the answers. And my mantra is pretty much rapidly becoming, we have to learn together fast. The point here is that humans, we don't yet know how to live sustainably on this planet. I've got some images there on the screen. One of them is signifying the growing world population. So we have a growing population on the planet, but we have finite resources. We have just one planet, that is our home. The top right there is a picture of one of the river valleys in Chile, where the government in Chile, I don't know if we've got any people from Chile on the call here, I don't want to offend anybody, but the government was selling off licenses to big businesses to use the water. So the indigenous people that had relied upon and looked after their water supply for centuries, for generations, suddenly are now finding that these resources have disappeared, which is very concerning. Then we've got, obviously I've already mentioned about mass migration, and we've just obviously had the earthquakes in Syria and Turkey, and it's clear that the responses to that are not the same as they would have been if in certain other parts of the world there is clearly huge inequity, and that is driving conflict around the world. But the central point I want to give you for project management is that we are used to a model where we have a project sponsor, we have users who, as project professionals, we would often go to specify the requirements, to steer the project. But nobody knows how we can live sustainably on this planet. So we cannot leave it to other people to tell us what to do. My impression is that everybody is waiting for somebody else to solve these problems. And governments don't have the answers. There isn't a magic discipline. The scientists are not going to come up with all the answers. So lots of people have lots of bits of knowledge, but the key thing is we have to work together to learn, and we have to do that fast, because some of these crises are affecting us now. Certainly, many parts of the developing world are already experiencing these firsthand. We can look at what's happening, and the reality is that in the developed world, we are even more dependent on these, and that the impact is going to be even greater because we are even more dependent on complicated systems, on the carbon, fossil fuels, biodiversity that we've been destroying at an alarming rate. We don't yet know. The scary thing for me is we don't yet know whether in biodiversity terms, we may already have reached some tipping points. So this is no longer about the future. These problems today are about today. And with projects that we manage today, the decisions we make today shape that future. So this is not, sustainable development is no longer about the future. The future we talked about in 1987 when the first agreements were put in place about some of these challenges and how we should tackle them, talked about future, but it's no longer the future. These things are happening now. And we have to recognize that projects are where we make decisions that bring about the future. Okay, so that's enough doom and gloom. So we have the Sustainable Development Goals that I mentioned earlier, and you can see them much more clearly here. So to help project managers understand them, we have tried to group them for the 3 areas that we would talk about. Responsible project management is, at its heart, it's about trying to change what we believe about projects and project management and encourage project people to become advocates for a better future. And that better future is all about harmonizing the interests of people, the planet, and prosperity. Okay, so you might talk about that as the planet, for the environment, society, and economics. And those are the, so we've grouped the goals in relation to those things to try and make them a bit more manageable. Okay, so that's enough doom and gloom. The extent of the challenge is very well documented now. The solutions are not yet well documented. There are many success stories, and a lot of what we're about is trying to encourage the sharing of success stories. So how can we improve what we do? Let's go on to some specifics. So back in 2018, we developed a manifesto. So you may remember that thing called Agile that started with the Agile Manifesto. So we thought, well, what's the biggest change that's happened in project management in the last 50 years? We argue that would be Agile. That started with a manifesto, so we thought that was a good place to start. Not everybody agreed with us, and they still don't. But we looked at the Agile Manifesto, and it was structured very much like this manifesto is. So you've on the left there, you've got 3 core values: conscious awareness, regenerative approaches, and collaboration and engagement, rather than sort of competition, monitoring, control, and so forth. And then on the right, you've got a series of 10 driving principles. We originally had, our very first version, we had 8. The first version of the manifesto came out of a social learning workshop. Well, it was a series of work leading up to a social learning workshop, where we were pleased to be able to bring together not just academics, researchers, educators, but also practitioners. So that's one of the challenges that we've been aware of in project management, is that the gap between research and practice has been quite big. So we've been trying to bridge that gap. So we brought together a whole mix of people. We brought together people who weren't just project managers as well. We brought in some other disciplines as well, including law, including marketing, say business disciplines, of course, but also some from the scientific community. So we had a big group of people. We drafted in real time over 2 or 3 days the manifesto. The first version of the manifesto came out, and people were, I think on that very first day we had 20 signatories, which I am told is more than the Agile Manifesto has achieved in its first iteration. We then, some researchers in Spain tested out those 8 principles and added 2 more that we were absolutely delighted about, because they were things that we'd almost thought were too obvious. We hadn't explicitly mentioned them as principles, and they were engagement and transparency. So we were delighted to come up with version 2, and that very much shaped the well, indeed, we haven't touched it since, not in any significant way. It has been translated into, I think it's 16 different languages now. They're all available on our website. You've got the address at the bottom there. The manifesto itself, as well as the guide that we produced, is available as a free download. So we've already got 16 translations, which in itself has kicked up some very interesting discussion about some of the key words. And that's a future piece of work that I think will be very, very interesting. So just moving on then. So some of the people, so at the moment, we're in the situation where we've got well over 200 individuals have signed the manifesto. We have 5 big organizations that have signed up and indeed the people represented by those individuals represent more than 30 universities and 30 companies around the world. So it's more than 16 countries now. And that on the screen there, you've got just a sample of the people who are represented in the signatories that are already subscribing to those values and those driving principles. And I was asked earlier about the logo, our RPM logo in the top left there. We're very proud of that, because the graphic designer that created that for us, we said, well, we've got this idea about project managers who juggle lots of things. But what the graphic designer didn't know was that we'd actually identified some new groups. So traditionally you have the business, you have suppliers, and you have users represented. But we said, well, if responsible project management is about taking sustainable development seriously, then we need biodiversity. We need the interests of the planet to be represented in there. We need local communities. So you'll see, if you look at our guide, we advocate for at least 6 different groups to be represented in the decisions that are made on projects. Now, how you actually represent biodiversity and the environment in a project, on a project board, say, is an interesting question that we're still working on. There are various models in business about how that can be done and how that is done. One case study that was shared with us had the interests of the local community and the environment represented by one person. The challenge there, I think, is that those interests may not be aligned. So the biodiversity interest or the ecological interests may not be identical to those of the local community. So I think we do need to think more carefully about how some of those interests are recommended. But what we said right at the beginning was, it's already a very challenging job to juggle cost, time and quality and various stakeholders. We do it as part of our jobs, which is why we argue that project managers have many of the skills needed. And we don't want to add more work to the project manager. So we really feel that a responsible project manager needs to actually become much more of an advocate and a facilitator, rather than simply adding to their already great workload. Okay, so that's some of our thinking. Right, where am I going next? I'm going on to some of the specific things that we can do. So one of the things we've done is reconceptualized what we mean by project success. So some of you may well be familiar already with this pyramid of 4 levels that Darren Doucher observed quite a long time ago now. But at the bottom, you can see there we have project management success, the very conventional cost, time, quality view. He then identified another level that was probably taking a longer term view about the success of the product as another way of viewing the success of the project. You'll also, I'm sure, be familiar with ideas about business value and business benefits. And then future potential was a sort of 4th level that we hope to be able to sort of leverage when we're delivering a project. But we think fundamentally that needs to be reconceptualized. So our reconceptualization of project success really needs to start with looking at sustainable development. That needs to be the foundation for what we look at and how we define the success of our project. So that is flipping that triangle on its head. So putting future potential at the bottom, at the foundation, and that is a way of transitioning to a better future for people, planet, and prosperity. Once you have a vision for that, you can then have a vision or more clearly articulate what the value will be in social, environmental, and economic terms. Then you can start talking about identifying specific stakeholders and what their satisfaction would be like. And only once you've done all of that can you really clearly see what reasonable measures of cost, time, and quality might be for the particular project. It's a fundamental reconceptualization of projects and project success. Okay, so that's one change we propose. One of the first value is all about recognizing diverse perspectives. And this is a diagram reproduced from some government literature produced quite recently on systems thinking that show, and the example here is used to illustrate the idea of how you understand diverse perspectives. They take the example of a pig, and you can see for yourself in the diagram that there are different perspectives depending on who you are. So this idea of different stakeholders and how they might see the project differently is absolutely crucial to understanding responsible project management. It's absolutely crucial to systems thinking. So you can obviously look at that and say, and I would urge you to have a look at many of the other tools that are up on the government website in that toolkit for systems thinking. So you can see there's some very different, sometimes contradictory or conflicting perspectives of how the pig might be seen. And I would argue that projects are exactly the same in that depending on your stakeholder perspective, you may have a very different view about what the purpose of that project is. And that would lead you to focus on a different set of outputs. And traditionally, we focus on delivering the outputs. So actually asking some very challenging questions is one of the most important things that a responsible project manager can do. Right, now I'm just noticing the time. I'm going to accelerate through some of these tools, but talk to you. One of the things I'm going to suggest you do in a minute for your activity is to do a little pig diagram. So think of the different perspectives on the project scenario that I've mapped out for you. Okay, so the second value was all about using restorative processes. Project management as a linear process is clearly not sustainable. It's based on a consumption model. It's not sustainable. And the other thing that's important is that with planning and the way we give so much attention to planning in project management, that tends to focus our attention on what we do know. But of course, as I'm sure everybody here knows, it's the things you don't know that trip you up when you're managing a project. So this idea that we can plan a project perfectly from start to finish at the beginning is clearly, there's some merit in doing planning. I'm not suggesting there isn't, but it focuses our attention on what we know and not on what we don't know. So I quite like, this is on Neptune's Staircase in Scotland, and the analogy with waterfall, okay, I'm sure won't be lost on most of the audience. But this idea that we can define a series of steps that we can go through unproblematically right at the beginning, I think we widely recognise now as had its day and has its limitations, shall we say. And this idea that projects emerge once we start taking a sustainability view that recognizes that we don't know how to live sustainably, means we get something that might look more like this. And we need to be ready to adapt as we move through our projects. And we might well have more than one plan that we can roll out if things change as we're going through. If we start to pay more attention to the things we don't know, then we can develop a series of plans and we're ready to be more adaptive. Okay, so that's the idea of a restorative process, and also this idea of planned versus emergent. So I've just mentioned that we see projects as a traditional linear process with inputs, processes and outputs, with a traditional focus on deliverables. And I'm sure you'll be familiar with those activities there as the key sort of things we take into account. What we've done is to rearrange those things into more of a circular process, and that is very closely associated with the idea of restorative principles, in order to balance. And this is, we can see this to some extent happening in agile approaches, where we develop a set of objectives, we deliver something, and then we check our understanding. So it's not a new idea, but I think we need to think of the focus being that transformation process and not the outputs. We need to work out what outputs or products we need in order to move us to a better future. And we're going to be uncovering new knowledge all the time. So we need a much better way of handling that. So just to get to the end of this section then, so the values of project management are reflected in the perspectives on project management that are shown there on the left. So responsible practice, the idea of delivering value rather than just products. Systems thinking is core to what we need to be doing. And then we need to move to the idea of engaging people. And again, the term stakeholder management briefly came into the bodies of knowledge and then was very rapidly replaced with stakeholder engagement, as there was growing recognition that we can't manage and control stakeholders, we have to engage with them. So what we've done is created a competency framework, and there's some, I've reviewed an awful lot of different competencies of project management. So I've combined, or we've combined, sustainability mindset and sustainability thinking with conventional project management competencies to come up with that new framework on the right. And the reason the pink bit is shown as sort of a little bit out is that is where the most, I think the most work that is to do there is around becoming a responsible project practitioner, because this involves really shifting our position and becoming advocates for a better future. So there's a lot more about this. There's some, I'll put it on the Padlet, the resources are there for you. So without further ado then, I think we're now running about 5 minutes behind my schedule. So I think we will, shall we, I don't know, I'm happy to have a discussion here with the session hosts, whether we want to reduce the time in the groups to 10 minutes or whether we still want to give people 15. We've got time just about to do both, or to do either. But I'm going to direct you now back to the Padlet where there are the instructions for the activity that actually I have not I've not printed off because I was trying to save paper, but they're on the Padlet. And again, you're going to be working in the same breakout groups. One of the first thing you're going to do is try and understand different perspectives on the project. You've got a little project scenario that I hope you can skim through quite quickly. Again, I won't attempt to, you can read it quicker than I can probably talk through it, so I won't do that now. I'm going to stop sharing, stop screen sharing, and if you'd like to go into the groups.
Yeah, Karen, I think we can afford to give them the full 15 minutes, so let's put them into the groups now.
Yeah, it is quite a demanding task, so let's, yeah, great. Well, I see there's an interesting question there that I'll certainly happy to take when people come back from the groups. people going into the same groups?
No, I think I did the option that puts them into different groups.
Ah, right. Oh, sorry.
Okay, I think everybody's back. If you haven't already got your responses onto the Padlet, you can still rush them through now.
Okay, well, I've just done a screen share on the Padlet, so we can just have a look. Group 1 haven't put anything up there yet, so we'll come back to them. Okay, I'm going to make a note of groups. So, group 2, you put some different perspectives up there, up on the Padlet. Would you like to say something about the opportunities for environmental and social value?
Sure, yes. So, I mean, we were considering a project from project perspective. You may have multiple perspectives. I can hear myself. No worries. So customer perspective, and then there's a finance perspective, and there's the ESG perspective and shareholders perspective. So we have, if you think about customer perspective and the shareholder perspective, there may be in alignment or they may be conflicting on certain topics. So, and then also if you can see finance perspective and ESG perspective could potentially have been conflict, those two stakeholders, because if the finance wants to save money, whereas the environmental, social and governance perspective is saying that we need to improve the environmental values as well as social and any other social value perspectives. So finance tries to cut costs, and ESG tries to enhance the environmental and social governance. So that could be in pulling the project into two different tangents. Also, the social value that the project would create is, if this particularly was a software project, then automated tasks reduces manual labor and may free up physical resources. However, there's another trade-off here, is that as we discussed earlier, that it could reduce the online carbon footprint, increase online carbon footprint. So that's in a summary, yes.
Oh, I'm just been trying to scroll up and down your group 2 column. It looks like somebody's just deleted what they put up there. They looked like there was an interesting list of stakeholders up there, which was great to see. The post up there at the minute, though, is rather generic. But there was one below it that was specifically about the Stonehenge project, but it seems to have gone, so I can't.
I think that's group 3.
Oh, is it?
I think it's group 3.
I think it was group 1 on the left. I can see stakeholders.
Oh, yes. Oh, right. Okay. Maybe it went under the wrong group to start with. Okay. Yes. I mean, I suppose group 2, what's up there is quite generic. It's not really starting to tease out some of the specifics for this particular project and the conflicting views there might be. I mean, there was a question in the chat about ESG, and I suppose it's a couple of things that as a perspective and as a thing that people are doing now, ESG has been very, very sort of heavily criticized. And I don't think it's not necessarily just one perspective. There are lots of different perspectives, and I think to really make a difference, we need to get under the skin of some of that. But thank you for sharing. Anyway, it's Amit. So that's group 2. Can we go back to group 1 now? You certainly got an interesting list of stakeholders there. What opportunities did you identify? I'm not sure if I can get down. Oh, yes, here we are. Perspectives. Okay. Oh, wow. Oh, gosh, somebody's been busy. Okay, lovely. I'm just wondering if I can make that any bigger. I probably can. I'm sure I can. Increase. Okay, so what have we got there?
You can click on it and it does expand.
Okay.
If you double click. Yeah. Oh,
That wasn't very helpful. Okay.
it's been zoomed in extra, but yeah, you can do Control-0 just to reset the size of the zoom on the browser.
Okay, right. Okay, so yeah, so I'm not sure where the opportunities are there. Certainly what is nice to see is a good range of different perspectives being recognised, and maybe it was too ambitious in the 15 minutes to expect you to actually dig into some of the opportunities for increasing social or environmental value. I mean, as I say, obviously there's a couple of, let's before I go into that, let's see whether any of the other groups have got any further. Okay, so thank you. Did anybody want to speak to any of the specific opportunities from group 1?
One of the things that Tony Lee came up with was the providing education and outreach to the local schools and communities and stuff.
Sorry, Martin, I can see you or hear you are talking, but it's not coming across clearly enough.
All right, sorry about that.
Oh, that's better.
Yeah, one of the things Tony Lee came up with was about the education values as well. We popped some stuff up there in group 1 there now as well.
If you look under group 1, they've got a whole raft of opportunities.
Good. I mean, one of the points I wanted to make that I can certainly build on that to highlight is we're very good at managing risks, and quite often the risks we look for in projects are things that are the threats and the things that are going to make things go wrong. One of the things we can focus on for responsible project management is actually to seek out those opportunities to do better, to do more through our project. Doesn't always have to cost more. There are quite often decisions we can make that allow us to have better outcomes while balancing other needs. So that idea that we need to really focus on opportunities. Yes, we need to be aware of increased risks from the environment and from social considerations, but there's also opportunities to do more. Hence my suggestion that you would sort of say specifically seek out opportunities on this activity. So yes, I can see you've got some great ideas there. Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, group 1. So what have we got? Supporting the local community, promoting accessibility, incorporating renewable energy. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the simulation was a simulation of something that doesn't exist at the moment. So that's obviously an experience that people can have that they simply can't have in another way, because you can't do it sort of physically. Incorporating sustainable design. Yes, you could. Yeah, so you've actually got the business of building the technology system to deliver the VR. Yes, so you can look at things like if it was people at the visitor centre who were going to make use of this, you'd look at whether they use like the cardboard versions of the headsets, or how you approach that would be something to consider. Yeah, okay, great. So we've heard from groups 1 and 2, group 3. Anybody there like to just brief?
Yep, so I don't think we've quite got the exhaustive list of different stakeholders that group 1 had. But yeah, we had a look at a few different perspectives on the issue, and I think from an environmental view, there's potentially going to be a lot of benefit in that there's going to be less damage from all the people running around the landscape near Stonehenge. And there's also going to be potentially going to be less emissions, because there's going to be a lot less traffic going to and from the site. So that has some pretty big implications in general. And then from a sort of business perspective, there's obviously going to be some new opportunities because a very different approach to the whole thing, instead of having, you know, like a physical visitor center and museum and that kind of stuff. And, you know, they've probably got a souvenir shop there and a cafe and all the rest of it. So, yeah, it's kind of hard to see what the opportunities are because it's so different to what there is at the moment. But that's definitely a very big change there. And then also, there's going to potentially be, I've actually just thought of this just now, but there's going to be a whole lot of education opportunities there as well, I think, because, you know, if you design your project properly, you can integrate a lot of different sort of education things into that as well. You know, you could have online information stuff that fits into the VR, and or sort of have the options to, you know, have a look at like be able to see Stonehenge at different times or its lifespan, or sort of the cultural things which might have happened around it, or that sort of thing as well, I'm thinking.
Lovely. Yes, that's great. Thank you very much indeed, Lucas. That was, wasn't it? Okay, so group 4. I think that was, you were group 3, weren't you, Lucas? Let's move to group 4. Anybody from group 4, or were you group 4, Lucas? Sorry, I've lost track.
No,
No, we were.
Oh. Okay, Anya, are you group 4?
I were, but I was going to let someone else take the thing this time, but I don't know if that was someone trying to speak there.
Okay, well, do you just want to say a few words about your discussion?
Yeah, so we kind of just focused about the stakeholders that were in the brief description, just obviously was aware of that we only had 15 minutes. So the main thing that we kind of talked about was the local residents and how, you know, it can positively but negatively impact them. So they might have 2 different perspectives, even though you can group them as kind of one big group of local residents. Some who may be business owners of the kind of local cafes, or who may do tours and stuff like that, obviously will lose business, and so that's obviously a kind of negative impact, and they'll have a negative view about it. But then some maybe really, as Lucas pointed out in group 3, have the environmental impact about the less traffic, and obviously that's a positive thing for the local residents as well. The pagan religion we didn't really know too much about, but it was just that, you know, they wanted to do certain rituals at certain points in the year, so, you know, it may be less busier for them to do that. English heritage, obviously they're commissioning the project, so we identified that obviously it's more income generating, and also a member of the group identified that it has a massive historical view and just gives further kind of justification for people who want to know more about the site in general. And then the National Trust obviously has murals around the Stonehenge site as well, so it could be a loss of business for them. So they may have a negative perspective if less people are traveling to Stonehenge, less people may be also traveling through their murals as well. So yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Anya. Yes, all very good sound points. Okay, group 6. Anybody from group 6 still?
You mean group 5, I think, Karen, do you?
Oh, okay. Yeah, possibly. I've lost track. Thank you, Shirley. Okay, group 5. Anybody from group 5?
I did pop in right at the end. And I think we got to the idea that, you know, the VR could be used accessible anywhere. So, but it was kind of quite late on that I joined. So happy to leave it to someone else to comment. But my main comment was the discomfort and noticing the discomfort of going into the very different areas and pits of knowledge that I may need to have, and a different way of thinking, and how nice it is to be with other people when we're doing that, but also uncomfortable because you have to kind of admit you don't know things or you don't understand things. So I thought that was really interesting for me to observe and be part of, be thrown in the deep end like that, which I'm sure we're all going to be.
Yes, yes, indeed. Well, thank you, Shirley. Yes, indeed. That being uncomfortable, but being comfortable to say I don't know is really, as you know, is a really, really important part of project management. Lovely. So anybody from group 6 now?
So as far as we got was to list some perspectives and then just to jot down some notes about a few of them. So we thought existing curators, people that are managing the site, they would have an opportunity in terms of reducing the wear and tear on the real site. Visitors would potentially be able to visit remotely and would thereby reduce their travelling costs and the carbon costs associated with that. We thought maybe if these things were, you know, the virtual experience was available in a number of museums, and you might be able to encourage people to visit their local museum rather than travelling a long way. And there is this thing about the potential development of a tunnel underneath Stonehenge. So we kind of thought that maybe if you're cutting down on local traffic, you potentially don't need to do that development or other large developments that affect the local area.
Indeed, yes. Yes. Thank you very much indeed, John. Yeah, all very valid points. And group 7.
Well, not to want to buck the trend, but one of the points that we came up with was if you've got virtual reality and it's available online, that's a massive marketing tool. And you might seriously increase the number of visitors because they've seen the picture, they want to see the real thing.
Indeed,
so
yes.
That is one contrasting thing with everybody else.
Yeah, no, yes, absolutely.
We may well change that significantly. But we did a lot of talking and had to very rapidly rattle off a list of stakeholders and their interests at the end. English Heritage, they own the site, they need to protect their asset and they've got an income stream they want to protect from it or increase, hence the marketing tool bit. You've got the developer for the virtual reality. They'll want to produce a quality product because it's good market exposure. They'll get a lot of work from it because it'll get a lot of publicity. And if they do a really good job, that'll improve their image no end. UNESCO will want a good image because it's a World Heritage site. Now, for the local residents, traffic's going to be an issue. It's either going to drop because people only do it on VR, or it's going to increase a lot because people then want to come and see the place and see it for real. And if they come in by the coach load like they do now, that's going to be a bit of an issue, but it might well boost the local economy. So they make a lot more money round and about. Environmentally, well, that depends whether there's more visitors or less visitors, really. It could go either way. Two of us have contact with Druids. So we discussed their wish to maintain and preserve their access in the face of anything and everything else as an issue. And then we finally got down to the actual people who are going to use this thing. It needs to be easy to use. It needs to be high quality. It needs to be accurate. If you're going to see Stonehenge change from a circle of wooden stakes through the blue stones to the sarsen stones and so on, all the way through to the modern day, then it's going to have to be a seriously good product for it to be worth using. Yeah, and then we finally got onto the National Trust and the effect on other sites nearby. They might well be prodded into creating VR of Avebury, for instance. So it could spread. And we talked about 50 other things as well along the way. But I'll leave it at that for now.
Well done. No, thank you very much indeed, David. I mean, yours and indeed all of the groups, what collectively I think we've highlighted is how a little movement in one way could have dramatic effects somewhere else. There could be unintended consequences, especially what you were saying there. And at the moment, when you're starting out, you don't know. So I say one of the important things is to start asking more challenging questions and what if questions, and really try and uncover some of these things. So thank you very much indeed. So I'm just going to stop sharing that and just finish off with my final slide, which was really just to really conclude by highlighting the things that the RPM movement is trying to do, which is all about we host, well, Shirley and I host a regular monthly meetup online, the RPM Cafe. If you'd like to come along and join us, that we do that through Meetup. The new competencies we've been talking about, and systems thinking and anticipatory skills and things like that. We've have set up a course on that, the sustainability mind shift for projects. And that you can find out all about that at the RPM studio that is part of our website, Responsible PM. So I think without further ado, all that's left for me to say is thank you very much indeed. Thank you for inviting us. You can find the manifesto online, please do. If you subscribe to those values, then please do. I say you can do that online or come along to our monthly cafes, because we do recognise this is hugely challenging for project managers, and it's all about supporting each other. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Karen. That was an absolutely excellent session, and some fantastic engagement from all the participants, I think. And I should probably ask David to close the proceedings.
Yes, well, thank you for saying that, Simon. I was going to say the same. Karen, I congratulate you and your colleagues on increasing the profile of RPM and the right approach to it. It's such an important topic, and the more people become aware of it, the better I think the whole of society will be. I think one of the challenges is this need for a holistic approach to any issue that and including projects that the world is attempting. And I think that one of the biggest challenges to that is the political interference that there always is. It's a real challenge, and politicians don't always see the full holistic benefits that the rest of society might find. I mean, you showed that picture in Chile of what happens when people interfere on without really understanding everything that's going on. And I think in Turkey we've had a similar problem where the projects dealing with the buildings overlooked the fact that they weren't using the right building materials. So that's just one example, and I think project managers can end up in an invidious position, and it's quite hard to be ethical in an environment where there's huge pressures. So I think this is the sort of stuff that needs addressing, ways to help project managers succeed for the benefit of society. So, and I'm sure you're dealing with those sorts of things, Karen, and I will continue to watch with interest. So as I say, I'm going to congratulate you again on a superb presentation. I'd like everyone to remember that, don't forget, it's 4 weeks, so we look forward to seeing you next week again. And a quick plug for PROMS-G's next event after the school. It's on 19th of April, if you haven't booked for it already. And it's quite a long title. Is it time for the PMO to embrace the realms of strategy and innovation? By Ivan Lloyd. He's the CEO of Edison 365.